few viewers. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have to apologize. This webcam is really old, so the video quality is terrible. So I'm sorry about that. I've never used this this method before, so you guys should forgive me if I'm sort of muffing this here. But the best way for this to work would be for you to ask me questions. So I'm going to just kind of flip back to Facebook here and see what questions are up. And again, I want to apologize for the poor video quality. I don't have much better than this. So let's see what we've got here. Let's see. I'm just going to pick a question at random here. So Maria said, is there any question that the Senate and House would try to impeach Trump within the first year to get Pence into the office? That's a very interesting question. I am a little bit skeptical of that. I think that, I should say something before I get into the answer. Is this working? Can you hear me? If so, I'm not sure if there's any way for you guys to actually comment on this. I can see 9 viewers, but I don't know if it's working or not. So I'm going to click this chat button. Maybe that will. Okay, so there's a group chat, I guess. So I'm not sure if it's working okay or if it's not working. I guess if you could just put something into the chat window, then I can see whether or not it's good or not. Or on Facebook, I'll just try to flip back and forth between them. Again, sorry for this super bad video here, but there we have it. In any event, the question was impeachment of Trump in order to get Pence in. I think one thing you have to remember is the fact that Donald Trump is popular with Republicans. He's very popular with Republicans. In fact, the last I checked, he's something like 20 percentage points more popular than Paul Ryan. And Paul Ryan is like was at least super popular among Republican voters. So I tend to think that the odds that they would try to like defenestrate him like that and put Pence in power are very slim. Now, of course, there is a caveat to that, which is, if Trump does something totally crazy. If it's super crazy, by the way, you may not know this, but there's a mechanism which actually would allow Pence to try to get rid of Trump. He can declare him mentally incompetent. And if he can get a majority of the cabinet to go along with him and the eventual approval of 2/3 of both houses of Congress, he can actually declare Trump mentally unfit for the presidency and rule. I think that's highly unlikely. But again, you have to remember that any removal of Trump would require a vote that would be 2/3, not only a majority of the House, but 2/3 of the Senate. And I tend to think that the Democrats in the Senate would probably rather have Trump than Pence. I mean, Pence is just about as conservative as they get, though he is a much more mainstream politician. So it's hard to really answer it's not hard to answer the question. I think the odds of such an impeachment happening are slim to none. But anything is possible. That, I guess, is fair. So let's see. What else do we have? Okay, what are the environmental implications of a Trump presidency? That's a really good question. I guess the big one would be the Paris Treaty, which is going to limit emissions. Trump certainly does not need to sign on that, and it'd be very easy for him to end that. A lot of people right now are talking about the fact that he looks like he's going to appoint, a climate change denialist to head the EPA up. To some degree, I guess I have to say that most of you guys are young and you don't remember, but this is what Republicans do. When Republicans are in power, the environmental portfolios are managed by basically resource extractors. This goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan when he chose James Watt to be, I think his name was James Watt, to be a Secretary of the Interior, and Watt was, I think, an oil and gas man. This is just the way that it always works. I think that it's true, though, that you're going to see most environmental regulation fall to the states. The EPA was really taking the lead in regulating carbon emissions and other things like that. And I think we're going to have to see if that continues to occur. I think it's probably not. I think that ultimately at this point, environmental regulation is going to go to the states, and especially California, because California is such a large market with 30 million consumers. When they regulate a product for the California market, oftentimes, products have to follow along. This is how a lot of emission standards came about. Even in Republican years, California would simply set a regulation. That was challenged by the Bush administration, but I believe that California's right to hold its own environmental standards was more or less upheld. So that being said, the environmental implications for a Trump presidency are not good. I mean, he's a resource extractor, so I think it's unfortunate. I guess you just have to say to yourself, it's only 4 years. I think that a lot of industries are naturally on a road towards sustainability. While I think you're going to lose a lot of leadership at the federal level and the federal government, wind, solar, and other alternative forms of energy are, I think, only going to increase in viability as the years go by. A lot of cars and other products are being made more and more fuel efficient, not just for the United States, but also, I guess I should mention, for Europe. The European market, they're a lot more stringent about environmental regulations, especially now after the whole Volkswagen fiasco. So I think that you're going to see more environmentally friendly, environmentally efficient products coming out, even regardless of the Trump presidency. And there's also individual choice. People are acting in more environmentally responsible manners. There's municipalities like New York City or San Francisco. There's states. There's other things like that. So those are all points that might change things. And, I guess you have to ask yourself, how much damage can he do in 4 years? Well, I mean, certainly some. I'm not going to deny that. But I don't think that his presidency alone is going to inexorably hurl us off the cliff into some kind of environmental cataclysm. So I might be wrong, but I'm pretty confident of that. And, the other question is, how long is he going to stay in office? I mean, the guy is 70 years old right now, if I remember correctly. And so he'll be 74 by the end of his first term. And part of me feels like he's not even going to want to run for a second term. I mean, being the president is it's a rough job. It really is difficult. And I don't know. I mean, he's a pretty spry guy, but I just wonder if he's going to have it in him to even run for a second term 4 years from now. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But when it comes to the environment, really all hope is not lost. Between European regulations, between states, between municipalities, between companies and corporations. I know that a lot of us are not used to thinking of companies as, like do-gooders or all the rest of that, but there's a tremendous amount of money to be made by companies that are able to, be more efficient. So I think that those are legitimate solutions to some degree to some of these problems. So don't despair too much, I think. So let's see. I see that Hannah has asked, how will our ties to China change as a result of Trump? This is the $25,000 question. Obviously Trump rose to power to some degree, criticizing China, or perhaps I should call it China. He's accused them of dumping products on our shores. He's accused them of being a currency manipulator. He's done all these different things. And one thing I'll say about Trump is that he's been very consistently anti-free trade. I mean, he famously took an ad out in the New York Times in the 1980s, back when it was Japan that was really the sort of dangerous, foreign importer. And he accused America of being taken advantage of by Japan at that time. Now it's China. So I don't know. This is another one of those situations where we're going to have to find out whether or not his governance matches his rhetoric. If he does what he says he was going to do, he might go to the World Trade Organization, try to get China branded as a currency manipulator. He might try to use his power in the House to basically jack tariffs up on Chinese goods. I think that this would be pretty bad. It really wouldn't help very much of anybody. It might help some industries that have been hurt by Chinese competition, but I tend to think not. I tend to think that, what'll happen is, first of all, it'll increase the prices of goods, and of course, increased prices for goods hurts poor Americans the most. In that sense, it would serve as a certain kind of regressive tax. Additionally, I think what it would do is it simply speed the path towards automation. I mean, most of the jobs that have been lost in the manufacturing sector, have been lost to automation, not necessarily to outsourcing. So finally, if he's going to close off the border to China, then companies are simply going to go to places like Vietnam or Mexico, or and I mean, I guess you can try to play whack-a-mole with all these different industries. But I just even Donald Trump, with all of his protectionism, I just can't see him building a fortress against the world. I mean, that's kind of like you're wandering down into Hugo Chavez territory there. And I mean, I don't know. I just don't think that Trump's going to do that. So economically, I guess if he follows through with his plans, then it's going to be higher prices for a lot of Americans. I don't think really it's going to solve any of the problems that he wants to. Although it will look good. A lot of people like to see America looking tough. As far as geopolitically and militarily, that's a bigger question. The question is, the biggest clash with China has been, number one, how much do we support democratic dissidents in places like China itself, but also in Hong Kong, Tibet, and then number two, Chinese adventurism in the South China Sea, and then of course, I guess you can add to that, the status of Taiwan. It's hard to say. I mean, there are traditional Republican ideas here, which is to say you robustly support, individuals who are under attack by the Chinese government. You robustly support Taiwanese sovereignty, and you aggressively move American vessels in the South China Sea to let China know that their will cannot pass unchecked in that area. And in fact, Barack Obama, who is a Democrat, pretty much followed that stuff to the T. Will Donald Trump do that? It's hard to say. He's spoken about how he doesn't really want America spending a ton of money to, kind of build this giant sphere of influence. And we spend a lot of money in the South China Sea trying to, I guess you could say, protect our allies. Will Trump demand that Japan kick in money, all the rest of that kind of stuff? If so, we might withdraw. If we withdraw, China will expand. That will become their sphere of influence. They've already been aided in this by the decision of the new president of the Philippines. They've got their own Trump over there, Duterte, and he's aligning himself towards China as well. So if Trump does what he says he's going to do, it's going to mean a decrease of American influence in the South China Sea and a dramatic increase in Chinese influence, though presumably there would be a big taxpayer savings to Americans. As far as the status of Taiwan, that's a really open question. I find it hard to see Trump abandoning essentially a capitalist democratic country to the Chinese. And I don't really see China as, wanting to launch any kind of, military assault on Taiwan. That seems totally beyond the pale to me. Then again, President Trump seemed beyond the pale to me also. And here we are with President Trump. So go figure. Let's see. Daniel said, do you think Trump and the Republican Congress will pass budgets that are at least remotely reasonable? The tax cuts he suggested, let's see, during his campaign, the corporate tax cut in particular seemed to point to massive budget deficits. Well, this is a really interesting question. I remember the Bush tax cut. The Bush tax cut passed, and yes, indeed, it led to massive deficits. I think there will be some kind of gigantic tax cut, and it will lead to massive deficits. But hey, the good news is that interest rates are low right now, so we're not going to pay a huge. We're not paying a lot of interest on that debt. So hey, happy days are here again. But yeah, I think that there will be a big tax cut. The corporate tax cut would be a very interesting one. It would cost the United States a lot of revenue. Interestingly enough, there's actually, believe it or not, there's a lot of liberals who believe that we should cut the corporate tax rate. The argument there is that corporations, which basically generate new money for the economy, shouldn't be taxed. We want more corporations and more corporate profits. If you're worried about the rich, who are the CEOs, the argument is you should simply tax them, tax their incomes at a greater level. Of course, with Trump and the Republicans, you're going to have, low corporate taxes and low individual taxes. So anyway, the short answer to your question, Daniel, is I think he will blow a hole in the budget. To some degree, they're going to have to stare into the abyss because, Paul Ryan and Trump, they're throwing these wild numbers out there, but now they really have the power to do what they want to do. Are they going to do it? Are they really going to pass those huge tax cuts? My guess is that they will. Maybe not the total numbers that Trump promised when he was running, but I think he's going to do it. One interesting question is he going to follow through with his promise to tax hedge fund people, in particular the carried interest loophole, as they call it? That is a really fascinating question, and that could be a major rupture within the Republican Party, and especially antagonize the donor class. Interesting to note that Donald Trump, despite the fact that he did not, spend that much of his own money, seems to be pretty immune to the donor class, which is pretty unique for really almost any candidate. So he kind of has carte blanche. And I think that rank and file Republicans do fear him because of his popularity within the party. So anything's possible. I'm really interested to see if he goes after hedge fund billionaires, like you said he would, and tries to, the big question in general with Trump is when Paul Ryan gives like a giant bill and plunks it down on his desk, is Trump going to actually study it, read it, and go back to Ryan and demand concessions and changes? Or is he just going to, sign it and go back to golfing in Mar-a-Lago? This is the question of the Trump presidency. How much is he going to chart a course that's independent of House Republicans and Senate Republicans and really be his own man? And how much is he going to just sort of follow their wishes? I think actually, for all of Trump's sort of maverick status, all you guys out there that are liberals and progressives, I think you're probably going to want to hope that he bucks the Republican Congress quite a bit. Although maybe not on free trade, although I'm not sure how you guys feel about free trade. Obviously, now there's increased skepticism about free trade. So I think that it's up in the air. So let's see, what else do we have here? I'm not sure if you guys are able to see my YouTube chat, but let's see. Here's a follow-up to the environmental question. What is the role and responsibility of scientists to get involved in policy, and what impact do you see there being on federal funding for both academic and industrial research? Well, look, it's a hard question to answer if you're involved in science. I think that the public policy process is always a tricky minefield to navigate. Obviously, most scientists rely on it to get grants, from the federal government to do research, and that's often how they get involved. I think there's nothing wrong with using your position to advocate for, for changes. I remember when George W. Bush was president, and he, froze stem cell research, and there was quite an uproar from the scientific community. There was a lot of lobbying. I don't know, it actually didn't really affect him. He kept that freeze in place all 8 years of his presidency, but I think it still raised the conversation, and a lot happened as a consequence of it. So I guess I would say, yes, as a scientist, I think you should try to be involved in the policymaking process, but it's hard to give you a specific piece of advice because I don't know exactly what your what your field is and what your what area you're talking about. Obviously, some areas of science, like say stem cell research, are a lot more, let's say, controversial than other areas are as well. Let's see. There was a question about. Let's see. I'm trying to find this. There was a question about the TPP. Will the TPP pass anytime soon? I think that things are looking very grim right now for the TPP. This is, of course, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was a huge international trade deal, which had most of the countries in the world in it, although I should note excluding China. It doesn't look good right now. Barack Obama, who is a free trader, is trying to get it passed in the waning days of his administration during the lame duck session of the House and the Senate. The question is, are there enough free traders among the Republican Party now that are willing to admit to be free traders, along with the Democratic Party, to bring about this ratification? I suspect the answer is no, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But I guess I would say 75 to 80% chance of TPP going down, and so I just don't see it happening anytime soon. So let's see. Will Trump use the NDAA provision Obama signed with serious reservations to indefinitely detain American citizens without due process, especially with his talk of jailing political opponents, says Hamar? Well, that is a really big question. I think that it's hard to answer. This is another one of those, what will Trump do kind of situations. I think that, I guess I could start out by saying I hope he doesn't do it. And I I just have to hope that it's not going to happen. Um, I just don't think he's going to do it. I mean, I would not necessarily be surprised to see him deploying this in the war on terror. If there's somebody who seems like they might be a suspect in a terror attack, that kind of thing, and you might see it happening. But I tend to think it's not going to be deployed against, let's say, Hillary Clinton or, media officials. I guess what I'm saying is I'm optimistic. Maybe this is silly, but I'm optimistic that we're not about to slide into Putinocracy during the Trump administration, despite his bromance with Putin. I just don't see it happening. I don't see him using these powers to sort of indiscriminately lock people up left and right. I could be wrong. But I just don't see it. I don't see it happening. But again, take that with a grain of salt. Daniel Mendelson said, "What effect, if any, do you think the president has on race, gender, LGBT relations on a cultural level? Policy-wise, do you think Trump will be better or worse on social issues relative to the average Republican politician?" This is another really great question. I mean, Trump has been characterized previous to this electoral run by his relative moderation on social issues. Issues of race and bigotry notwithstanding. I just think that, but on abortion and gay rights in particular, I think he's been pretty much a Democrat up until recently. It's a hard question to answer, I think. My gut tells me that he personally is not opposed to gay marriage or gay rights. For all of his conservative leanings, he's still a New Yorker who, lives in Manhattan and has had probably significant contact with people who are gay. And exposure to gay people just makes you much more likely to support, LGBT type initiatives. So in my gut, I feel like he's not going to come down on gay people in that way. To some degree, it's not really in his power. A lot of this stuff has been done judicially. I guess indirectly he could affect things by appointing conservative justices to the court. If the court maintains its 5-4 conservative, liberal split, as it probably will, it's a status quo. That's essentially the same ideological split that brought us gay marriage, right? Of course, things could start to change if Breyer and or Ginsburg die or resign. Let's assume they're going to die in the next 4 years. Then the way that Trump would affect LGBT rights would probably be by appointing very conservative justices, not because he wants them necessarily to destroy gay marriage, but just because he's basically proving his fealty to the right wing of the Republican Party, and then those conservative justices could theoretically rule against it. That being said, I think the worst case scenario would probably be state by state, although that creates a giant mess because, of course, Article 4 and, recognition of marriage across state lines. Not to mention, I'm not really sure. It just seems problematic to me to imagine a gay couple that's married in, let's say, Mississippi, and all of a sudden unmarried because of a change. It almost sounds kind of like a Dred Scott situation. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that gay marriage is probably going to be fine. As far as other social issues, when it comes to abortion, again, like at this point, I almost feel like Roe versus Wade is only of symbolic importance as it is right now. In southern states, conservative states, it's already very difficult to get an abortion as it is. In liberal states, it's relatively easy, and I kind of feel like that's going to be the status quo as it is right now. But again, Daniel, this is going to be another one of those things we're really going to want to watch and see how socially conservative is he going to be. It's worth noting that guys like Rudy Giuliani and Chris Christie, for all of their kind of authoritarian bluster, have not been known for their strong social conservative. They are still blue state Republicans. Giuliani, he was always dressing in drag, I have to say. So, and actually when he got divorced, he lived with 2 gay guys for a while after his wife booted him out. So I don't know. I mean, like, despite the distaste with which many people view guys like Christie and Giuliani, they're not like John Ashcroft style conservatives. So we have to see, though. That's a wait and see situation. I suspect that between, let's say, Mike Pence and Donald Trump is a lot more progressive on a lot of those social issues. Armani asks, what's my view of the riots happening right now against Trump? Well, I guess I have complicated feelings about this. I mean, first of all, there are demonstrations, and I think, demonstrations to me seem fine. I mean, it's everybody's First Amendment right to get out there and demonstrate when they feel upset, when they feel disappointed, to put pressure on Trump. So I think that, obviously, legally speaking, it's totally fine for them to do it. If it's a riot and you're like breaking windows, burning down buildings, I mean, legally, you're not allowed to do that. So you've got a riot or you've got a demonstration. One's illegal, the other is legal, but are they advisable, right? Are they advisable? I think that riots are clearly inadvisable. I mean, there's nothing that will alienate Middle America faster than, destruction of property. And I also should note that in many cases, riots tend not to happen. I mean, a lot of these demonstrations are near Trump's property, but a lot of times riots tend to happen in poorer communities, and those are the communities that are often victimized by those riots. So I'm going to take an anti-riot stance here. As far as demonstrations, I mean, that's a harder one. I think that if the demonstrations are positive and inspirational, then perhaps they can be significant and can help move the needle. On the other hand, I think they also run the risk of giving real fuel to the fire of those individuals who vote for Trump. I mean, Richard Nixon got elected with the so-called silent majority. And there's a question to be asked about how democratic it is to move the country by seizing the street. I mean, the argument that can be made is, Trump, for better or for worse, won at the ballot box, and you sort of want to give him a chance. I think personally that the value of demonstrations right now is catharsis. I mean, I think that if you're somebody that feels really angry or really disenfranchised, the demonstration gives you the opportunity to get out there and yell and, chant and blow some steam off. And I think that that's a valuable thing for people. I would never tell you not to go demonstrate if you felt that you should do it. Do I think that the demonstrations will have any meaningful effect on the Trump presidency? I tend to think not. I tend to think, knowing Trump, that it would only probably cause him to dig in further and probably push him more to the right. Because as protesters demand things, it's going to be harder for him to give in, because giving in will look like he's conceding, and that would go against his narrative. So I guess my answer to your question, Armani, is that protests, I think, are useful as an exercise in First Amendment rights. They're useful as a catharsis, but as far as meaningfully affecting, and maybe, by the way, building some grassroots candidate, to take him on in 4 years. But as far as meaningfully changing policy during the 4 years of the Trump administration, there I'm a lot more skeptical. Mia asks, does Merrick Garland just vanish into obscurity now? Short answer is yes, but I will say that he's still the Chief Justice of the D.C. Circuit Court, and the D.C. Circuit Court is overwhelmingly the most important lower court in the land, or I guess I should say Circuit Court in the land. I know that is a maybe cold comfort for Merrick Garland, but yeah, he's certainly not going to make it onto the court. It turns out that McConnell was very crafty to block any action on Garland for this whole time, and it looked like he was going to have to eat crow, and Hillary looked like she was going to win. I mean, she could have ditched Garland and picked somebody very liberal, but obviously that's an alternate timeline. We're in the Trump timeline. Some have called it the darkest timeline, and I don't think that. I don't think that he will make it on, and I think he'll never make it onto the Supreme Court because he's old. So if a Democrat were to get elected 4 years from now, he'd pick somebody younger, or she'd pick somebody younger. So yeah, sorry, Merrick Garland. Thomas Perskin, can Trump feasibly get out of the Paris climate deal? How much of a blow would that be to our world's progress with regard to environmental sustainability? I believe he could get out of it. I have to confess I haven't looked into all the details of this particular issue, but I feel pretty confident that the president has the ability to really to do what he wants when it comes to these kinds of foreign issues. So yeah, I think he could. Kat Dubson, I know that's not your real name. How likely is nuclear war? What protections exist against it? Well, this is one that'll keep you up at night, I guess, if you're really worried about these kinds of things. I think that when it comes to nuclear war, the president has his finger on the button. I mean, there's no check or balance here when it comes to nuclear war. As you may or may not know, the president travels everywhere with the so-called nuclear football. It's a briefcase with all the launch codes in it, and there's a member of the armed services that guards that nuclear football at any moment. If Trump would like to nuke, say, I don't know, Venezuela, all he has to do is get the codes, call up the Missile Command Center, and whoops, apocalypse. There's no safeguards really against it. Do I think Trump is going to actually launch a nuke? I'm going to say no. This is a prediction I can make, because if he breaks it and he does launch a nuclear war and we all die, no one will be able to come back and say that I was wrong. So maybe you'll find me in the cave and you'll yell at me. I just don't think he's going to do it. I mean, Trump is a loose cannon. Yes. Does he bluster? Yes. Is he a wacky guy? Yes. Is he going to cause, look, he's got kids, he's got grandkids, he's a human being. I just don't think he's going to, nuke the world. So I don't know. Take that for what it's worth. Is political correctness dead? Says Hamar Lim. There's a narrative right now, which I'm reading among my more libertarianish, rightish students who are saying that the Trump presidency was kind of a direct result of the sort of rise of political correctness among the left. The argument goes that these sort of working class whites, and also I guess young white men living in their mom's basements or whatever. No offense if you're in that category. That they were just so angered by the fact that they don't have happy lives, they don't have successful lives, but they're made the victims, and not the victims, they're made the villains in this historical narrative. And so all these guys marched to the polls and they voted for Pepe the Frog, basically, in order to kill political correctness and all the social justice warriors out there. So here's what I have to say. First of all, no, political correctness on the left is only going to get stronger right now because Trump is president. You're going to see a lot of people who are going to look to make universities into an alternate universe to Trumpism, which is going to mean rejecting the things that Trump says. So I think you're going to see, at least in the places where it exists, I think PC culture is only going to increase. I think that is the narrative true that a rejection of political correctness is responsible for Trump? There, I have to say I'm skeptical. I'm sure that like Gamergate guys and other people like that, like many of them probably did vote for Donald Trump, but I can't believe that they were the decisive force. I mean, if you look at the vote totals, it's really quite stark. I mean, Barack Obama won at 69 million votes, more or less, in 2008. In 2012, he won about 66 million votes. In this election, Hillary Clinton won about 59 million votes. We're talking about a New York City-sized population of voters that have sort of vanished from the Democratic rolls. What happened to all those voters, right? I mean, in fact, the idea that an angry surge of voters came out to put Trump over the top looks tricky because, Trump got fewer votes than McCain in 2008. He got fewer votes than Romney in 2012, right? So I think the story of this election is less like angry, righteous trolls marching to the polls and defenestrating Clinton. And it's more just like a lot of Clinton voters sitting on their hands. Who are those voters sitting on their hands? I think that those voters were black voters who voted for Clinton in huge numbers, but not to the same extent that they voted for Obama. How could you expect them to? He was the first black president. White working class voters also, who turned out to be a key part of the Obama constituency, and a lot of them, many of them voted for Trump. I think many of them just stayed home. They didn't vote, and the result of that was, this. It was the loss for Hillary Clinton. Although we should note that she did win the popular vote. I mean, that's cold comfort, but for many of you who are like, how could the majority of Americans vote for Trump? Well, they didn't actually. A majority. Actually, I'm not sure if it's a plurality but whatever. More people voted for Hillary Clinton than voted for Trump. So, so is political correctness dead? No, it's not. No, it's not. And I have to confess, I think that there's something about being polite, but I do worry about sending my students onto the college campuses of today. It seems like things have gotten very extreme over there. The pendulum perhaps has swung a little too far in that direction. Let's see. George Sivan says, do I think that Trump will pardon Snowden? Well, that's an interesting one. I do not think he will. I don't think he'll pardon Snowden. I just think that, it's true he's living in Russia with his boy, Vladimir Putin. But I have not heard Trump really rail very much against the surveillance state. I mean, Trump has spoken about extrajudicial imprisonment. Trump has spoken about torturing people. I mean, these are all things that Snowden and all these sort of civil libertarians are really 100% opposed to. So I just don't see Snowden and Trump's sort of the Venn diagram. I don't see it really connecting, with the exception of the Russia connection, which to me just doesn't seem enough. And why would Putin want Trump to pardon Snowden? I think Putin likes having Snowden in Russia. He's like Putin's little pet. So I just don't think that he would do it. So my guess on that question is no. Spilled some water here. Daniel Mendelsohn said, why did WikiLeaks become so partisan in the last few months? What's their angle here? Well, look, I mean, I think that, sorry, I'm just looking around for things. I think Julian Assange has shown that he is, he really hates Hillary Clinton. I think that he is opposed to her. I think that also they've been fed lots of stuff from Russian hackers, and clearly Russia had a dog in this race, and it was Donald Trump. So I just think that that's the reason why I think WikiLeaks is sort of under the thumb, I guess you could say, of Assange and Putin, and that's why you're seeing it. It's an interesting question: is what if somebody had hacked Trump's email? Well, Trump doesn't use email. It's slight digression, but my buddy works for the SEC, and he's always investigating, all these issues of corporate fraud. And he said, one of the interesting things is that whenever people get really powerful, they just completely stop using email entirely. They don't tag. They send nothing out on paper. They don't even talk on the phone. Everything is face to face. So there you go. Some Trump. I'm not sure how much of that is sinister, how much of the fact that Trump is old, but anyway. In any event, I think that what if I don't know, Republican servers had been hacked and they had been leaked to WikiLeaks? Would that information have been published? That would have been the test, and we don't know what's going to happen there. So Nita says, do other branches of the government, such as Congress, have any possible avenues to affect cabinet nominations? It's a good question. I think the answer is yes, of course. I mean, ultimately, all cabinet members have to be confirmed by the Senate. Of course, remember, the Senate is going to be, controlled by Republicans, and there's a traditional courtesy which is given to the president when it comes to cabinet nominations. So I suspect that whoever Trump wants for the cabinet, he'll get for the cabinet. But traditionally, this is again an interesting question. Traditionally, cabinet members have to have really sort of crystal clean backgrounds. Any slight impropriety and you're sunk. Tom Daschle, who's a former senator from South Dakota, had a really minor infraction. He had a government car that he used for personal business. That was enough to completely kill his chance to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That's the pattern, but Trump himself has broken so many patterns. So would he, for example, pick somebody like a Chris Christie, who is dogged by all kinds of scandals? Would he pick Chris Christie to be on his cabinet, or other individuals? We don't know. That's something that's going to be interesting to look at. But I think, generally speaking, when it comes to cabinet nominations, although the Senate does have the ability to confirm or not confirm, I think that ultimately, sorry, I'm just going to get a paper towel. I'm back. I think that he'll get who he wants. I think he's basically going to get who he wants. I mentioned before, you're going to want to keep an eye on who he picks, because that's going to be a really valuable insight into what he's thinking. I mean, I sort of keep going back to this theme as I talk about the Trump administration, but we really are going to want to just see all the things that he does in these early days, because they're going to give us a clue about what kind of an administration he's going to run. That's pretty much how that goes down. Let's see. Thomas says, Bernie was upset today that the Democrats lost their hold on white middle-class America. How do they regain that? Well, that is a big question. I mean, do the Democrats turn left? Do the Democrats turn right? Well, I mean, or do they maintain the center? I don't know the answer to that question. I think that it's hard to predict, because a lot depends on what Trump does, and they're going to be reactive to some degree to a Trump presidency. So we really have to see how it actually goes down. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. Obviously, there's a lot of people now who are saying, the Michael Moore, I guess, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders branch of the party, and they're saying that if only, Hillary Clinton had been more harsh on free trade, or if Bernie Sanders had won the nomination, then the Democrats would have won. Bernie Sanders could have reached the angst of these Rust Belt voters in the Midwest, and he would have, told them that he hated NAFTA and that he was going to, protect their jobs and what have you, and they would have voted for him. I have to confess that I'm a little bit skeptical that it would work. I just think that the problem is that, not since FDR has the blue-collar white Americans, not since FDR have they really been sympathetic to redistributionist government policies, really, frankly, because of issues of race. I mean, the argument is that people are, and I don't want to single them out necessarily, but all over the world, people are generally okay with redistributionist government policy, as long as the money is going to people who seem similar to them, which is one of the reasons why European countries have such higher rates of taxation, because, they're all basically the same. And it's interesting to note that as those European countries have gotten more multi-ethnic, there's been far less support for those kinds of policies, and there's been the rise of really chilling far-right parties that make Donald Trump look like Barack Obama. So I think that redistribution, it sounds like a logical solution for it sounds like a logical solution for recapturing the Democratic white middle class, but I don't know if it's going to work when put up against the sort of conservative populism of Donald Trump or Trump-type politicians. How do they capture the white middle class? I mean, I don't know. It's a hard one. If they don't turn to the left, I don't know how the right. I'm not sure how the center path can help them. I mean, how many people are out there marching in the streets for free trade? You know what I mean? It's a difficult question. How do they regain the middle class? Honestly, Thomas, I think part of what they might need is just like a charismatic figure. I mean, and a good old-fashioned middle-class tax cut. That's what Bill Clinton always used to do, and Obama did it too. I mean, Obama basically, as you probably remember, or as you know, Bush, had these huge whopping tax cuts, and Obama repealed them, but he didn't repeal them for everybody. He only repealed them for the richest, right? The middle class got to keep the tax cut. So that was kind of the Obama version of a tax cut. So, I mean, the way you traditionally win the middle class is you throw them some pork. You give them a big old tax cut, and you let them do their thing. I don't know though; it's a hard one. Mia says, "Do you think that a man with Hillary's qualifications / email baggage would have won?" This is a really fascinating question. Did Hillary lose because she's a woman? This is one of those questions that unfortunately we're never going to really be able to answer. I think it's a counterfactual. I sort of have two feelings about this. One part of me says that, well, yes, like if she'd been a man, she would have won. And yet, I don't know. I mean, there's a couple things to remember. First of all, Hillary Clinton's rise is sort of inextricably linked to her gender in the sense that like she rose to power because she was the first lady, and that was what gave her the prominence to run for senator of New York. I mean, I guess you could imagine some alternate universe in which there was some other female president, and she was, some other female president, and male Hillary Clinton was the first gentleman. But now we're in such a different universe, it's hard to even make any kind of conjecture about that. I will say this, interestingly enough, studies have shown that American voters are typically no less likely to vote for a candidate because they're female than because they're male. And remember, there's plenty of women who have run as conservative Republicans, done quite well in places that you might consider sexist. I think that the bigger issue is that fewer women want to actually run for office because of the demands of the job and the expectation that women play a larger role, in the home. So if the sexism is there, I think it's often at an upstream, so to speak, in terms of the societal expectations for women, and less because, people don't want to vote for a woman. To me, Hillary Clinton resembles Mitt Romney. That's the candidate that keeps coming to my mind. I mean, Romney was sane, he was competent, he was capable, all the rest of that kind of stuff. But, he just could not, he was not like a change agent. I think that like what Obama and Trump have in common is that they're both change agents. And, to the people in this country that are on the wrong side of this big economic divide, the ones who don't have college degrees and don't see the prospect for meaningful employment, they're desperate. They really are desperate. I know it seems silly because you go and they have like these giant houses and they have, flat screen TVs and what have you, but, they sort of sense that they're on this lower rung and they sense that their jobs are in jeopardy. There's instability and they're angry and they're angry and they're pissed and they want to throw like a brick through the window of the establishment. Well, Obama was the first attempt. Trump was like, he was their dream, and Trump is kind of their nightmare. But ultimately, they're trying to destabilize. Romney and Clinton are establishment, politicians, and I think that this election really called for somebody more transformative. So my feeling for why she lost was just because. Now, here's an interesting caveat: what if she had been, let's say, Michelle Obama, right? I mean, there's something a little creepy about the spouse of the president following the president. But if she had been Michelle Obama, imagine some hypothetical Michelle Obama who, had the experience of Hillary Clinton. I think that she would have a hypothetical Michelle Obama might have been stronger because not only is Michelle Obama, I think, a much more charismatic speaker than Hillary Clinton. Michelle Obama is black, and she would have had that much larger African American turnout. Hillary had it, but she didn't have the turnout that she needed. To win states like Pennsylvania and Michigan. Like if the black vote had come out larger in Detroit and Philadelphia, she would have pulled it out. So it's an interesting question. So let's see. Alex says, how can we deal with the post-election rise in hate crimes and racist graffiti? I'm more fearful of the citizens, especially pro-Trump supporters, who might now feel that they have carte blanche to exercise violence and intolerance towards marginalized groups. Well, this is a real concern. I don't want to minimize it, but I almost feel like I don't have enough information to really judge on these things. I guess I would just say we're hearing a lot of anecdotal evidence of bad things happening around the country after Trump, and I do not doubt that those bad things are really happening. On the other hand, I'd be curious to know how many bad things were happening a month ago. That is to say, we're a country of like 300 million people. You got to think that like there's swastikas being painted on bathrooms and Muslim women being hassled and all the rest of that kind of stuff. I'm sorry to say it, but I think it's true. So I guess I'd be curious to know whether there really is a rise in this kind of pattern of harassment, or whether it's just that we're sensitive to it now, or that the guy who would have just written a swastika on the synagogue, 3 years ago is now going to write, Trump won, baby, and then put the swastika on, right? Some of those questions we'll never know the answer to. I think it's also, you got to be really careful at this point about whether or not all these attacks are legitimate. There was a story about a woman who had like pushed down and her jaw was ripped off, and in, I want to say, Louisiana, and that's turned out to be false. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this is not true. I'm just saying that when you hear a lot of anecdotal reports coming through your feed, it's perfectly fine to sympathize and be horrified, but to quote Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. You really have to give it a little bit of time to see, whether this is a pattern. Let's take the worst case scenario and say that it really is happening. I think that if it really is happening, and it really is true that there's a rise in hate crime or violence, then, I think that people are going to have to put pressure on Donald Trump to repudiate these things. He's not really into repudiating. His supporters, but that's where the pressure is going to have to mount. And I think, if Trump wants to stay in power, he's going to have to ultimately respond to the public will. And I think that if there really are a series of attacks on people who are marginalized communities, it's ultimately going to hurt him. Although I have to note that people who are opposed to Trump have to avoid squandering that currency. I already heard a story about some Trump supporter that got pulled out of his car and beaten up. I mean, that kind of thing is not going to help anybody. In fact, the person that's going to help the most is Trump, because Trump's going to show that he was being victimized. So I guess we have to see how that works. 2 questions on the YouTube chat. I'm looking on the YouTube chat, but I don't see it. Let me just type the word test here. Well, I'm seeing it, but I don't see your questions on the YouTube chat for whatever reason. I only see me, but I don't see you. So I guess if you have a question, you should just type it into this Facebook feed that I'm following here. So sorry about that. Let's see. What advisor or figures do you think could have a positive effect on a Trump presidency? I have an answer for this, and it may sound silly, but Ivanka Trump. I don't know. I kind of get a okay, sane vibe from Ivanka Trump, and to some degree, Jared Kushner. Of all the people in his circle that I would like to really kind of have an influence on him, I hope that it's her. She just strikes me as a sane, competent individual, this is a very thin reed by which to build my edifice, but I just have a feeling that she would probably steer him in a proper direction. Once you leave those people behind, I don't know. I mean, with Chris Christie, Chris Christie demonstrated tremendous, corruption, venality, criminality. Rudy Giuliani just seemed like this kind of weird vampire Dracula, vengeful ghost. So I sort of am hesitant to say that they should be influencing him. I don't know, maybe someone like a Bob Corker, who is the senator from Tennessee, who sort of has won respect across the aisle for being a really competent, capable guy. I mean, if he was Secretary of State under Trump, that would certainly give me cause for comfort. But yeah, I'm going to go back to Ivanka. I think Ivanka is the one who I want to influence him. Mia said, what do I think of term limits for Congress? Could be a good thing. First of all, I think it's not going to happen. Congress would have to pass that law. And I just don't see them doing it. If they did do it, I don't know. I'm skeptical of term limits. I tend to think that ultimately, the people are the term limits. Like if you don't like your member of Congress, then you can always, vote them out. You can pick a new member of Congress. So I just think that I know it's true that there's gerrymandering. I know that it's true that there's people who are there forever and they never go. But I just feel like, hell, I think a lot of you would be happy if the 22nd Amendment didn't exist right now. I think there's almost no question. I can't say this with 100% certainty, but I think there's almost no question that Barack Obama would probably win a third term if it came down to it. I think that, sorry, I'm just typing this thing into here. I think he would win. So I guess ultimately, term limits fight both ways. I mean, there's really been only 2 presidents. I know the question was about Congress, but there's really been only 2 presidents who've been term limited out of office, I think, really since the 22nd Amendment was passed. The first one was really, I think, Bill Clinton, because, who was term limited out of office? Eisenhower was old and was not going to remain. Nixon, obviously, forget about it. Reagan was old, was not going to remain. So Bill Clinton was really the first person term limited out of office. He probably would have won a 3rd term, and Barack Obama was the 2nd. And I think probably a lot of you guys would have been happy with 3 terms of Clinton and 3 terms of Obama. So, just need to keep in mind. Although, again, it's worth noting that it is that is at the presidential level. So anyway, don't expect there to be term limits in Congress. I just don't see them. I don't see them going down that way. So let's see, what else do we have here? We have a question from let's see, Alice. Oh no, Alexei. No, he's just making a comment. How do I think immigration policy and limits in terms of visas like H-1B will be impacted by the Trump presidency? Well, that's interesting. One of the things I think that, Trump started out by saying he was opposed to illegal immigration, but then he sort of started to say that he was opposed to legal immigration. This is going to be another one of those kind of moments where we see how much Trump really believes his own rhetoric. When he was running for office, he was winning those nativist votes by saying that, he was going to build the wall and all the rest of that. On the other hand, look, his wife is an immigrant who is here more or less legally, although here she did some modeling work before she got her green card, but, basically a legal immigrant, a legal immigrant. I know that, the H-1B visas have also been sort of abused a little bit by certain companies. In general, though, I suspect that Trump is going to try to crack down on immigration. And I think it's going to be harder to come into the United States. That being said, that could be a major clash with this is going to be another moment where we see how Trump intersects with the Republican Congress, because, the Republican Party has traditionally been a party. It's true there are nativists in the Republican Party, but there also are pro-business Republicans, and the business community has typically been a big fan of immigration because it provides cheap labor. And there also are Democrats who support immigration. I mean, you could theoretically imagine some weirdo coalition of liberal Democrats who support immigration for human rights reasons and business-friendly Republicans working together to thwart Donald Trump from passing restrictions on immigration. But that's in the legislative body. Just as the executive, Trump can do all kinds of things to make things hard for immigrants by, for example, really deploying a lot more ICE agents to deport people. Will there be a deportation squad running through New York City? I don't know. I just think that Trump, forgive my vulgarity, but they say don't shit where you eat. I just don't think Trump, he lives in Manhattan. I don't think he wants to open that door. But I think that it's hard to really predict. But generally speaking, Maria, to answer your question, I think that immigration will be impacted, and he's going to try to decrease the number of immigrants. Do I think the landscape of healthcare will change much? If the ACA is repealed, how will that affect Obama's legacy? Yes. This is a huge question. Republicans have been maddeningly vague whenever they've been asked what they would put in place of Obamacare. They've just said it's going to be great, or Trump said it's going to be great, it's going to be beautiful, it's going to be wonderful. Well, what the hell is it going to be? We simply don't know. Would the Republicans have the chutzpah to take, these, tens of millions of people and just sort of bump them off of insurance? I mean, maybe. It sort of flies in the face of reason. So I have to think that they're going to craft something, maybe a market-based solution or something to take its place. You also have to ask yourself, what about denial of people with pre-existing conditions? For those of you that don't remember, there's sort of the three-legged stool of Obamacare, right? On the one hand, you want to get the insurance companies to insure people with pre-existing conditions, but of course, that will kill insurance companies because those people are really expensive. So you need to give the insurance companies more money. And so the way you give them more money is you basically force young people to sign up for Obamacare. Young, healthy people, the so-called young immortals, right? Their premiums provide the money, which allows the poor people allows the people with pre-existing conditions, those poor people with pre-existing conditions, to be covered. Well, those are the two legs of the stool that I'm really focusing on here. So basically, how do you sever that problem? How do you sever that connection? It's really hard to say. Yes, will this affect Obama's legacy? Of course. I mean, it's Obamacare, for God's sake, and if they repeal it, then it's gone. So yes. And by the way, I think it would be very hard to get it back again, because what are the odds that the Democrats are going to retake the legislative chamber anytime soon? It could be a long time before they retake the legislature. Of course, if Trump does something disastrous in the next 2 years, all bets are off. Smart money has Republicans increasing their representation in the Senate in 2018 because Democrats are defending far more vulnerable seats than Republicans are at that time. Although it's worth noting that the incumbent party typically loses seats in the midterm election, so we have to see what happens. But yeah, basically, long story short, I think that healthcare is going to be affected, and probably not in the way that you guys want it to. So anyway, let's see. Mia actually answered this question. She said block grants to Medicaid to the states. Yes, I think Medicaid. It's quite possible that Medicaid will become a block grant program, kind of like the way that welfare was, which means that Medicaid will probably become a lot more stingy. Especially, I mean, states like New York are probably still going to be generous, but states like Alabama, forget about it. So we'll see. Let's see. Julian says, I've been trying to find an upside to a Trump presidency. What do you think of a potential short-term increase in economic growth under some of Trump's policies? And then let's see. He said, oil and gas deregulation, corporate tax repatriation holiday, lowered corporate tax rate. While I don't agree with any of these policies due to the systemic harm they inflict, they do create some economic value. The shale oil gas boom has significantly reduced our dependence on foreign oil and sent OPEC and Russia into decline. Well, it's an interesting question. When it comes to oil and gas, I kind of think we're already there. I mean, ultimately, the shale revolution has happened. I mean, I don't really think that Obama has blocked it very much. I mean, Keystone was, I think, a symbolic victory, but not really. It didn't affect the flow of shale gas. At this point, I suppose, states like New York State, we don't allow fracking in New York State. Does Trump have the ability to change that? I don't think he really does. I don't think he really does. So I don't really see exploration changing. I suppose he could. Take areas that are under the control of the national parks and forests and open that up for oil exploration. So that might change things a little bit. It might provide short-term growth. Deregulation. With deregulation, it all depends on how the deregulation actually, how it actually functions. I think deregulation can actually spur economic growth if it's done properly. But of course, regulations often serve a purpose to prevent things like collective action problems and other issues like that. So I don't know. We'll see how that goes down. Corporate tax repatriation holiday. Yeah, I think that this is something that's almost bipartisan. I think that if Hillary Clinton had gotten elected, she would have also done this. I mean, for those of you that don't know, America has a very unusual corporate tax in that we tax all the income of our corporations that they earn abroad. And so, we don't tax it until they bring it back home. So what you have is companies like Apple and other companies that have huge, giant sums of money that are just sitting in foreign countries, and they don't want to bring that money back into the United States, because if they do, they have to pay the fairly high corporate tax rate that we have here in the United States. If we have a holiday in which we say, okay, bring the money back and we'll charge you a lower rate, it would mean more money in the coffers of the United States. I actually think it's probably a good idea to have that holiday because, we want to get that money some way or another. And a cut to the corporate tax rate. I do believe that a cut to the corporate tax rate wouldn't necessarily be bad if it were paired with maybe a more progressive income tax. You're probably going to get a cut to the corporate income tax and a cut and a less progressive income tax. So, take that for what it's worth. I don't know. I think that some of them might actually have some stimulative effects for the economy. On the other hand, you do have to worry about what his budget will do, especially, blowing a giant hole in the deficit. But I have to say, Julian, it's an interesting point. I would not be surprised to see some short-term growth. That being said, Trump has promised the moon. He's talked about 5% growth. I mean, many economists think that we're in this secular stagnation. Our productivity has lagged, and the question of whether we can even sustain a growth rate of over, 2 or 3% is really an open question. So while I do think, Julian, that some of these things might lead to a temporary bump, I just lack faith that they will bring the growth rate up any higher, especially when you consider just the low price of oil at this point. That's a major factor as well. Nicholas said, not a Trump question per se, but with your prior mention that education is one of the dividing lines between who voted for Trump and who voted for Clinton, what kind of education reform is needed to bridge that gap? What kind of reform, if any, is Trump going to enact? Well, it's an interesting question. Trump has actually, unlike Hillary Clinton, Trump hasn't taken money from teachers unions, and so he has supported charter schools and other areas. This might be one area where I think, obviously the educational divide is the thing that's responsible for the Trump presidency. On the other hand, I do think that if we're going to bridge this divide and bring people, can we take the bulk of Americans right now and get them to the point where they're doing knowledge tasks, non-repetitive labor, essentially white collar work? It's going to require a mammoth transformation of our educational establishment. I think that the solution to this is probably, if I was in charge of this, I would basically say that you have to allow all kinds of crazy models of schools that are completely different from our existing industrial model. There should be schools out there where, you're at home and you just take tests and get certificates, and then you socialize with your friends. You join a volleyball team and you just play every Tuesday. There should be schools where people do projects. There should be schools that are like Catholic schools. They gotta have every single kind of school out there, and see which ones work, and then the ones that work have to be replicated. But I'm not wise enough to think that I know the solution to America's educational problems, but I do know that the current model is pretty broken. Obviously those of us that went to STI or at STI, we saw the one that really worked great, but I think that for a lot of Americans, they're stuck in a bad system. So I guess that's not a super. What's Trump going to do? I think again, it's too soon to say. And also how much power does he have? Education has always been something that's largely been handled by the states, not by the federal government. But I do think he might make money available for more innovative educational experiments. And actually, to me, that would be one good thing about a Trump presidency. Let's see. Can I talk about his potential cabinet? Where would you put Giuliani, Gingrich, Christie? What is the potential of a Nixon-like inner circle that his cabinet has little to do with? Also about Nixon, can Trump go to China on a number of issues? I think yes, Trump can go to China. I think there's a potential Trump presidency that people might love, where Trump essentially moves to the center, repudiates a lot of his more harsh rhetoric, binds the nation's wounds, and then of course it's going to be free unicorns for everybody. That is to say, I think it's not very likely, but it's possible. He's such a wild card. Who the hell knows? It's very interesting. As far as the cabinet, I almost don't want to speculate because, it's just almost like a shell game at this point. And there's all kinds of new revelations that are going to come out. My gut thinks that you'd have somebody like a Gingrich and maybe a foreign policy role, that you would have maybe Giuliani as a natural attorney general, I think. Beyond that, I just don't want to speculate too much. I heard a rumor about Joe Arpaio being made Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. We just have to see. I just don't want to speculate. But yes, Mark, I think that Trump could go to China on a lot of issues. But would he go to China? That is the really big question. Hamar says Trump was initially rather anti-war, and I suspect he became more pro-war to go primary voters. Yes. Do I think he'll end up following through with the rest of the world, asking the rest of the world to pay for our protection and stop being the policeman of the world? That's an interesting question. I think yes. I think that Trump really is a dove in a lot of ways. He's an isolationist. For God's sake, the guy got out there and said America first. And when he was told that was the slogan used by Charles Lindbergh and the sort of proto-fascists, he still said America first. I think he's really going to do it. Is he going to tell NATO you got to pay up? Is he going to, do all these other kinds of things? It's hard for me to make specific predictions at this point, but I'll tell you this much: Trump, I think, will be a less hawkish president than Hillary Clinton would have been. With the caveat, he's a more emotional kind of guy. So I wouldn't be 100% surprised to see him get pulled into some foreign war because of, some personal insult or some fit of pique. So I guess there is a caveat to his dovishness, which is that he's very thin-skinned. He'll be on Twitter at 3 a.m, and God only knows what's going to happen. But I predict a less adventurous foreign policy than we would have had under Hillary Clinton. And certainly no action on behalf of, let's say, the Syrian rebels, or if anything, we're going to join Assad because of his closeness to his boy Vladimir Putin. So that's certainly possible. Let's see. And then Maria said, if we ask other nations to pay for protection and become more isolationist, can we expect to see a decrease in military spending? We might actually, it's possible. If Trump follows through on his isolationist tendencies, then yes, it will mean less money. This is going to be a major clash with the Republican Party also, because the Republican Party doesn't like to spend money on anything except the military. They love spending money on the military. And presumably this would be a peace dividend of a certain kind. Of course, the rest of the world might go to hell, but that would be money saved. That money that's saved is immediately going to be flushed out the door, though, in the form of massive tax cuts, I would think. So it's not like we're going to save that much. Why does NATO still exist? At this point, what is the source of our conflict with Russia? Can Trump solve or exacerbate it? It's an interesting question. I mean, I think that the idea here is that Russia under Putin has sort of crystallized into a sort of dictatorial, anti-American, authoritarian regime, which does illiberal things and promotes corruption throughout the world. It's certainly nothing like the Soviet Union in terms of its strength or its ability to destabilize anything or anyone. But I think there's a sense that, like, we as America want nations to follow us down the path towards freedom, prosperity, etc. So, we've got, there are more cynical people out there who say that it's just, power politics and we're just beating up on the Russians because they're weak. That's certainly what Putin would say, although he wouldn't agree that they're weak. But, like Ukraine, like what were we doing in Ukraine, right? I mean, not that we were there, but why did we encourage Ukraine? So, I think that, like, honestly, the Obama administration really did want to, they want to take Ukraine and, bring it into the light, so to speak. There's a lot of people who felt like during the Cold War, there were all these nations that were suffering under authoritarianism. And, like, we want to get them into the Western orbit. So, NATO served that role. I mean, for a lot of the countries that fled the Iron Curtain, like the Baltics, being in NATO makes them feel like they're finally safe with this Russian menace. Like, you can finally breathe free. And America, for better or for worse, we've been the defender, I think a very flawed defender, but the defender of free regimes everywhere. And that's why NATO has been a thing for all these years. As far as it's going to be interesting. I mean, we've had a horrible relationship with Russia. I mean, Donald Trump and Putin are buddies, but, I'm old enough to remember George W. Bush. George W. Bush said that, he said, I looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes and I saw his soul. And, of course, John McCain made fun of that in 2008. He said, I looked into Putin's eyes and I just saw KGB. But, W said that he could deal with Putin. And, of course, we also have that worked out. Although Putin was very staunch in offering support after 9/11, it's worth noting. Also, the Obama administration, they tried the famous reset button with Putin, so now we're going to have another try with Putin. I mean, it's really interesting. Will this one go? I mean, frankly, if we're willing to sort of shrink out of Europe and let the Russians throw their weight around and all the rest of that, then maybe we will have a better relationship with Vladimir Putin. Although in this case, the cure might be worse than the disease. So there you go. Andrew said, how do you see the issue of states' rights playing out with the GOP-controlled Congress? Generally, the Republicans have always pushed for greater state autonomy, but they've also showed on multiple occasions they're willing to block local initiatives that conflicts with conservative orthodoxy. This is true. I remember this back in 2000 when W was president. I always ask my students at the beginning of the term, what do you think about issues of states' rights? And during the Obama administration, they took the more traditional Democratic line of basically saying that states' rights were not good and the federal government should really run the show and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But I remember during the W administration, everybody was saying, oh, states' rights, they're a useful check on power. Of course, everybody's a hypocrite when it comes to states' rights. Okay, you want states' rights when you're a liberal and there's conservatives running the federal government, and you want states' rights when you're a conservative and there's liberals running the state government. Though it's true that states' rights have traditionally been used as a tool to support conservative policy, there's nothing inherently that makes them that way. And you might want to think all the way back to the beginning of the United States when those individuals who are most concerned about liberty and freedom, the Democratic Republicans, they were big states' rights supporters because the states were the traditional guarantors of individual liberty, except for the slaves, cough, cough. But in any event, there's nothing that says it can't be that way now. I mean, when you look at issues like, legalization of marijuana, gay marriage, California's emission laws, all these things came out of the states. They came out of the states first. So I think you're going to see a lot of liberals embracing states' rights right now, and you're going to see plenty of conservatives becoming, hypocrites and saying we got to have unified national government. Ultimately, like Emerson said, that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, and people want to get the policy outputs that they want to get. So, it's like judicial activism. Nowadays judicial activism is associated with liberals, but judicial activism back in the 1920s was associated with conservatives. There's nothing that says it has to go. And one of the most famous believers in judicial self-restraint was Justice Hugo Black, who was one of the most liberal justices on the Supreme Court. So this is just one of those issues that it's guaranteed to make you into a hypocrite, I think, and you should just come to terms with that. Andrew says, how do I see U.S. relations with the Asia-Pacific playing out once the United States officially abandons support for TPP? And do you think this will signal a broader collapse of regional free trade agreements, or do you think these agreements are likely to move forward with the U.S. as an outside player? So I'll answer that question first. I think that this will dramatically worsen our relationship with other Asian nations. You know, countries like Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines before Duterte have all been very much a part of the American sphere of influence. TPP was an attempt, I think a very savvy attempt, to bind them even closer to us, and it would have generated a lot of money for all of our economies. But abandoning support for TPP, along with cozying up to Vladimir Putin and not spending money to defend American interests in the South China Sea, I think that that's going to lead to a chill in relations with those countries. And you know, if that maybe they will now start to align themselves more towards China, because you know they're going to be the only dog in the dog pound there, so to speak. So let's see. Your second part of the question is, how do I see a Trump administration handling South China Sea tensions? On the one hand, he's skeptical about wasting resources on defending the interests of our Asian allies. On the other hand, he's fairly hostile to Chinese expansion and wants to project an image of American strength. I think when push comes to shove, that's a real hard one. He's a macho blusterer, so he probably would like to, you know, stick his finger in China's eye. But he's also pretty isolationist. This is going to be a real interesting question. My gut tells me that he's going to start out on an isolationist tack, but ultimately, I'm sorry, I'm just typing while I talk. I'm just telling him that I can't make Facebook Live work. So I don't know. On YouTube. Let's see if that works. I feel like he's probably going to start off on the isolationist track, but then I kind of feel like there's going to be some kind of insult or some kind of incident or something like that. And then Trump's anger will be aroused, and then perhaps he'll rush back in. And I don't know. That's my guess, but I'm really just shooting in the dark here at this point. It's hard for me to know exactly what's going to happen. Mark says, if America moves into an isolationist mood, will other NATO nations actually increase defense budgets? Yeah, this is an interesting question. Some of you may know that NATO actually legally requires you to spend a certain percentage of your GDP on the military, and I can't remember whether it's 2 or 4%. So forgive me on this one, but very few European countries actually meet this standard. We do. I think that the Brits do, but nobody else does. So they might, you know, and I guess that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. A lot of countries have, oh, the video feed is gone, but the audio is still clear. That's interesting. I don't know. I'm going to try to turn off my camera and turn it back on again. So I don't know if that's going to work. Turn camera off, turn camera on. All right. Well, it seems like I've been reduced to audio here at this point. So I don't know. Sorry. I have not been able to make the live stream go. But you guys can hear me, so sorry. I know the stream is getting a little bit lame here, but I guess think of it as a radio show at this point. So in any event, yeah, so the second half of the question is, what would your reaction be to U.S. protectionism, isolationism? Well, it's interesting. I mean, they sheltered under our military umbrella for such a long time. It'll be hard for them, I think, to really have to, you know, spend that money on their own. What kind of military threats do they even face at this point? That's a hard one. I guess Russia. Is Russia going to engage in brinkmanship with? Is Russia going to engage with brinkmanship with, you know, the Europeans? Would Putin march into, I don't know, Latvia? Those are open questions, and that will determine it. Can there be a trade treaty with the UK under Trump in the name of bilateralism? Maybe. That's the one trade agreement I might see Trump biting, or biting the hook or whatever. But I don't know. He's pretty hostile to free trade, so that's an interesting one. But if there is a country I could see him free trading with, it's the UK, and Theresa May is a conservative. I mean, of course, conservatives in the UK would be Democrats in the United States, but there you have it. I can see that. And then does this increase the chances of Le Pen, Wilders, Beppe Grillo? Yes, yes, yes. He's our Berlusconi, he's our Le Pen, he's our Wilders, he's our Brexit. There's a rising tide of anti-elitism, anti-free trade, native ethno-nationalism, defense of closed economies. Trump is part of that, and I think, yes, I think that, I mean, I can't really give numbers, but I just think that, you know, the fact that the United States, which is sort of the leader of the pack, which has traditionally been the great supporter of freedom, openness, and multiculturalism, has now, become a Trump state. Yeah, it's hard to see how that won't encourage, those far-right politicians in Europe. So yes, I think it does increase those chances. Connor says, I read a bunch of pundits talking about the DNC is likely to move to the left, as that's where the most energy is right now. Thoughts? Given the breadth and depth of GOP government control, could the Democratic Party reliant upon crowdfunding compete with the business-backed Republican Party? So let me answer your questions in reverse, Connor. First of all, the answer is definitely yes. I mean, just look at Obama versus Romney, okay? Romney got tons of money from super PACs and corporations and all that stuff, and still Obama beat him. And Obama was charismatic enough that he was always able to raise money from small donations. Small donations are, that was the thing that propelled him into the White House. But of course, to be somebody who gets there on small donations, you have to have charisma, which Hillary Clinton, I just don't think she had. Democratic politicians who have charisma today, Elizabeth Warren, I think, has charisma. Michelle Obama, though she's never won any electoral office, has charisma. I think that they would be crowdfunders that could possibly work. You might be able to get away with a less charismatic candidate if Trump really does something crazy that just energizes people, like, let's say like a John Kerry, who's not charismatic at all, but maybe could be the recipient of that kind of money just because, something horrible happened under a Trump administration. So I do think, Connor, that if there's a charismatic candidate at the top of the ticket, the Democrats can compete, with small donations. It's also worth noting that not every corporation gives to Republicans. Most corporations, if you look at them, give evenly to both sides. That's just playing. It's true. Resource extraction typically goes all Republican, but lots of big corporations give to Democrats as well. So there's plenty of money. I guess this takes us to the second point of your question, which is a Democratic Party that turns left might not have any of that corporate money and would have to rely exclusively on those kinds of small donations. Well, that's a harder question to ask. I think you're right, Connor. The energy in the party is on the left, especially among young people. You go to places like Jacobin and what have you, and they're so caustic towards the centrist Democratic Party. I think that those centrist Democrats, the Bill Clintons and the Hillary Clintons of the world, I think they're centrist because they saw what happened to them when they were more on the left. I mean, Bill was governor of Arkansas for 2 years. He was more liberal. He'd lost. They had 2-year terms in Arkansas. He lost. He moved to the center, and then he won, and he kept on winning. When he became president, his first moves in '92 were fairly liberal. The very first thing he tried to do is actually get gays into the military, and he lost. He tried to get Hillary Care passed, and he lost. And it was only once he moved to the center that he started winning. So Democrats have been burned by moving to the left in the past. And the country has just not shown a strong appetite for the kind of social redistribution that the left has called for. I would argue a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're a multi-ethnic nation. And, this is, I'm sorry to say this, but, the less homogeneous your nation is, the less likely people are to want redistribution of income. It's just that, when a poor Scandinavian and a rich Scandinavian look at one another, they're basically the same. Whereas, what does a rich white woman in Greenwich, Connecticut have in common with a poor Black Dominican kid from Washington Heights, even though they're only about a half an hour's drive from one another, right? They might not even speak the same language. I don't know. I mean, I think that the left would Bernie have won if he was the candidate? Would he have galvanized those Rust Belt voters? Maybe he would have. He had a certain kind of crotchety old man charisma. On the other hand, I just think that, the last time a strong social redistributionist won white blue collar votes was maybe FDR. I mean, LBJ might have been the last. Lyndon Johnson might have been the last one to really do it. So I don't know. I tend to think that a Democratic Party that turns to the left, that might be the special sauce that's needed to propel them back to power. But they also run the risk of sort of going down the Jeremy Corbyn path, and Corbyn has pulled the British Labour Party far to the left. And I see Mark just wrote Corbynization possible. Corbyn pulled the Labour Party to the left. Lots of people love the stuff that he's saying, but they are in the electoral wilderness, and they just simply will not get into power in Britain until they moderate. I mean, they hate Tony Blair now, but he's the guy that got them in. Now, they might say better to live in the wilderness with Corbyn than to have the prime ministership with Tony Blair. But I think most Democrats would say, I'll take Barack Obama, I'll take Bill Clinton over Donald Trump. So that's basically how that actually goes. So let me see. I'm just typing, yes, I would. It's nice when you have people who are connected with Facebook. Okay, so let's see. What else? So yeah, Mark said, is Corbynization possible? Yes, it's very possible. The Democratic Party lacks a leader too. I mean, right now the most senior member of the party is, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. So who's going to lead the Democratic Party in exile? That's going to be a question. Now, I should note the Democratic president, the hypothetical Democratic president of 2020, might be somebody we don't even know about. Barack Obama in 2000 was, an obscure state senator in Illinois. So we have no idea who is going to be coming up, I think. We have to see how that goes down. Let's see. Andrew says, do you think Trump is likely to revitalize a short-lived attempt at a joint operations room with the Russians in Syria? And if so, how do you see him handling the bureaucratic resistance that Obama had already received in attempting to do so? I think it's possible, Andrew. I would not be, greater coordination with Russia is something he's really said that he wants to do. But things are going to get really messy because, of course, the Russians support Assad and we have not. I am hesitant to answer the question, Andrew, because it's just there's so many questions right now about what's going to happen with his relationship with Putin and his relationship with Russia. I just don't know. I'm going to punt on that one. So let's see. Julian said, do you think Trump's views have actually evolved from his foundation in moderate Rockefeller republicanism to more extreme views he expressed on the campaign? Do you think he might be more moderate in some ways compared to the Bush neocon school of thought? This, again, as I keep saying, it's a $25,000 question. How conservative is he really? I actually was very surprised because once he won the Republican primary, I expected him to pivot and move to the middle, and he never did. And yet he still managed to win the election. So is this the famous Trump pivot to the center? Is it going to finally happen? I don't know. In my gut, I feel like he's not that conservative a guy, but does he really care? I mean, that is to say that how much does he really care about being president? I mean, supposedly when he offered the vice presidential job to Kasich, she basically said you're going to be the president. I mean, how much is Mike Pence going to really run the country while Trump plays golf? I mean, I don't know. Anyway, Julian, to answer your question, it's possible that he has more moderate tendencies, and we're going to see those moderate tendencies reveal themselves. But it's also possible that he's just going to, allow Paul Ryan to call the shots. We have to see how that actually works out. Let's see. Pundits say Trump. Let's see. Connor says social psychologists would say that the more you have to defend an argument, the more you're likely to adopt it. You might be right about that, Connor. He's gone through this, the fire of a primary campaign, and his staunchest supporters were these conservative people. When he went into these, halls and said these really bombastic things, people screamed his name. So that's something to think about. Hamar says pundits say Trump could be the closest to FDR with media embrace because of his love of TV. And does a pro-Hillary media shift? Well, let me answer this question in reverse. No, the pro-Hillary media will not shift. You're not going to see any change, I think, unless, let me add a caveat, if Trump moves to the left, if there's a pivot, if he starts to do things, then they will come around. No question about it. I mean, you saw this with David Souter, obviously a much less prominent figure, but when David Souter was named to the Supreme Court, nobody knew anything about his judicial philosophy. It was assumed that he was a conservative, and all of the media outlets beat him up. And then as soon as it became clear that he was liberal, they loved him. So I think that if he moves to the left, then they'll defend him. Otherwise, they will continue to attack him. As far as his connection, he does have this visceral ability to connect to voters. I suspect there will be a lot of TV addresses. Will they take away his Twitter? That's a question that we're going to have to see the answer to, but it's possible. Let's see. Andrew says, how do I see U.S. relations with Turkey evolving? On the one hand, Erdogan has a similar strongman image, and Trump is likely to tone down the criticism about Turkey's slip. I don't know. I think that I'm just going to, the audio might break up for a second. Just give me 1 second here. Just getting some water because I'm thirsty. When it comes to Erdogan, sorry about that. When it comes to Erdogan, I think that it's hard to say. Ultimately, I feel like with Trump, it's so much about personal relationships, and it's going to be like, does he mesh with Erdogan? Are they like buddies or whatever? You know what I mean? And I don't know. I think that in some ways they're birds of a feather, but I almost feel like without specific incidents, it's hard to say. I'm not sure I would have necessarily predicted Obama's action in Libya and his inaction in Syria. It was only once those specific wacky foreign policy events popped up that we saw what kind of a leader he actually turned out to be. So again, I'm sorry to put you off, Andrew, but I feel like with Turkey, we're going to have to wait and see. I feel like a lot of these answers are wait and see. But once the ball starts rolling, we'll have a better idea of where he stands. Let's see. Mia said, if you send me a new webcam, can you send it to Sty with my name on it? I think I'm going to try to buy a new webcam. So, this old HP one is not sufficient. Somebody said they can help me with Facebook chat in the future. So that might be, my goal is to do this on Facebook and not on YouTube. So let's see. Mark said, what does Trump need to do to be impeached by this Congress? Highly unlikely that he'll be impeached. But if there's significant criminality, here's what would lead to a Trump impeachment. I'll tell you what would lead to a Trump impeachment. Number one, some act of significant criminality, right? Perhaps probing into the Trump University or something like that, or perhaps the tapes are revealed from The Apprentice, and he's just saying incredibly horribly racist stuff, like dropping N-bombs or what have you. Although, by the way, that's not illegal. After there was an act of criminality, the next thing that would happen would be, how would the public react? If public opinion for Trump cratered and the public started hating him, like really hating him, like the way they hated George W. Bush towards the end of his presidency, if his approval ratings dropped down to a really low level, then I think you might possibly see impeachment happen. And of course, then anything's possible. I mean, ultimately, when it comes to impeachment and a politician, it's all about popularity, basically. If you're a really popular politician, everybody wants to be around you, and you can do whatever you want. Then if you're really unpopular, then you're poisoned. So kind of like what happened to Dilma Rousseff in Brazil. Technically she was impeached because of, the Petrobras scandal, but in reality she was impeached because the Brazilian economy foundered and she was seen to be responsible for it. So, if that kind of thing happens in the United States, it possibly could happen, but it's got to be really bad because we're so hyper-partisan. It's hard to think that the Republicans are going to, turf out their own, which is what would have to happen. On the other hand, they might like Mike Pence. So, in fact, they probably would like Mike Pence. So that's something to think about. Let's see. Maria says, should we expect to see change in terms of what voters want in congressional and presidential candidates? Will we see more people with no experience? This is a great question. This is the Kanye question, right? We're going to see Kanye. So let's see. There's three names out there: Franken, Cuban, and Bloomberg. I think of the three of them, the one who's most outside the political system is Cuban. God only knows. I would not be surprised to see Mark. A lot of people out there now who are not involved in politics are going to say, by God, if Donald Trump can do it, why can't I do it? So maybe we are going to start to see more outsiders getting into politics. That might not be such a bad thing. I mean, Trump doesn't seem like he's the most qualified, but, perhaps, I don't know, Elon Musk, I think was he not born in the United States, but he'd be a pretty cool president, you know what I mean? Maybe Bill Gates, I don't know. So possibly Mark Cuban, who the hell knows? Maybe Franken. Possible. It's certainly possible. Franken is, if he can shake the sort of like formerly a comedian kind of thing, he might be able to tickle those Midwestern Rust Belt, funny bones and make it possible. Bloomberg's too old. Bloomberg's already in his 70s, so I just don't see him possibly making a run, in this go around. And if Bloomberg had run instead of Hillary Clinton, he probably would have lost by an even bigger margin. Obviously that's let's see. Maria says, does this mean that only people who can afford this will be in politics? No, I don't think that's necessarily the case. All you have to be is a really charismatic candidate. If you're a really charismatic candidate, then money will flow into your pockets. Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, neither of whom had really any money whatsoever, had perfectly well-funded campaigns because they were charismatic politicians. If you are somebody who can capture the attention of the nation, all you have to do is open up your website and the money will just roll in. So I don't think that only rich people will make it into politics. And also, wealth, as they like to say, wealth can bring you to the dance, but it can't get you the girl. Look at what happened to Mitt Romney, right? And there's so many other examples. It's true, Mike Bloomberg would never have been mayor of New York if it hadn't been for his money, but he had to have some political talent to stay in office. And by the way, if it hadn't been for 9/11, he probably never would have won in the first place. So money is not enough. It's important, but I don't think it's necessarily the be all and the end all in politics. So there it is. Let's see. Chances of Citizens United being overturned, very, very low at this point. Had Merrick Garland made it out of the Supreme Court, then the chances would have been much higher. But with Trump there, I think Citizens United is gonna do just fine, and you're gonna have the same kind of campaign finance that you've had in place this whole time. So I wouldn't bet any money on that. Will a Trump presidency lead to a breakdown in transatlantic relations? Yes. if Trump does the things that he says he's going to do, there's going to be a definite breakdown in transatlantic relations. I mean, it's hard to imagine. I mean, like, when was the last time they'll get frosty relations with Europe? I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's like the 19th century. It's crazy. We're in such uncharted territory that I'm really hesitant to predict what's going to happen. We have to see. Angela Merkel is sort of almost threatening him, and like, there's a lot of people have said lots of negative things about him, but we'll see. I mean, maybe not. I mean, I said if he does what he said he was going to do, I expected that things would get kind of crazy, but I don't know if he's going to do those things, right? Someone mentioned Cuomo. Yeah, I know that Cuomo wants to run. He's definitely positioning himself for that. Would he do it? I think the answer is, let's see how popular Cuomo is in 2020. If he's got the numbers, I'm sure he'll go for it. In fact, I bet Cuomo would have run in this race had it not been for the fact that he sort of owes fealty to Hillary, and that was maybe a problem. I mean, not saying that Cuomo would have been a better candidate, but Hillary really cleared the field. So it's hard to know who might have been a better candidate than her after all this went down. Let's see, Connor said, what Obama improvements can we expect to see maintained for the next 4 years? In the past, large social safety net expansions were difficult to undo once voters began to expect the program to continue. Yeah, this is exactly the thing I sort of felt when I spoke about Obamacare before. It's just hard for me to imagine that they could just remove. That's why Republicans fought it so frantically, because they know that, like, once you've got that money, like, taking it away will cause, like, riots in the street. I don't know. I mean, like, on the one hand, it's true that people who lose Obamacare are going to, really freak out. On the other hand, Obamacare caused a lot of premiums to become a lot more expensive, and a lot of people are really angry about it. Would the anger of the people who lose Obamacare be possibly set off by the happiness of people who are paying less money? I mean, it's hard to say. I think that a lot of the social changes of Obama's presidency are not going to be undone. Gay marriage, although how much you can really credit that to Obama is questionable. I think gay marriage is not going to go away. So that's kind of a big one. Beyond that, abortion, I mean, it's not like abortion is so great right now. I mean, if you live in Mississippi, good luck, right? I think that's going to stay the same. Would a conservative Supreme Court overturn Roe versus Wade? I mean, Trump's going to pick conservative justices, so it's not really Trump's choice. Would those conservative justices then overturn Roe v. Wade? That's a hard question to answer, and I really don't know, because it depends who he'd pick on the court. I would argue that it would be pretty foolish for them to overturn Roe versus Wade, when essentially they have already achieved what they want, which is a state-by-state abortion regime. So it seems like it would be odd. It would just galvanize the left. So I'm not sure why they would necessarily want to do it. So that's sort of how I feel about that. Non-Obamacare stuff. Let's see. I'm trying to think of Obama changes. What big changes did Obama really bring? Aside from Obamacare, he appointed a lot of justices and judges. I think those are going to be there. Beyond that, I guess there was protection of national parks and forests, but those protections can all be undone as well. So I don't know. Let's see. Other ways Democrats could play Trump against Ryan and the GOP establishment to exacerbate their differences and dysfunction. Yes. Would he order the DA to prosecute federal drug regulations? I think yes. That's one then where I believe he would go back against Obama. Yes. I think he will be more of a drug warrior. But getting back to your question, Max, yes, I think that this is the crafty thing for Democrats to do. Try to play up the divisions between Trump, assuming these divisions exist, assuming that Trump turns out to be Trump and not just kind of a golf-playing absentee president who delegates to Pence. If Trump really follows through on a lot of his rhetoric, there's substantial differences between him and the GOP. So the Democrats are crafty. They will drive a wedge in between. They will drive a wedge in between the two paths, and that's what I would do if I were a Democrat. Of course, you have to remember that Republicans fear Trump right now. I mean, like, if you go against Trump, maybe he'll get you primary by Trumpian. Trump is really popular with the Republican base right now. So if you're an old school establishment Republican and Trump is proposing something that you don't agree with, you're going to be pretty hesitant before you go against it, I think. So that's something to be aware of. Let's see. People ask, am I trying to go to sleep? I'll take a couple more questions, but then I do have to go to sleep. Somehow take advantage of the narcissism and experience and lack of actual interest in policy. I think actually, in a weird way, Trump's narcissism and experience and lack of interest in actual policy would work to the Republican advantage. The more absent Trump is from policymaking, the more conventional Republicans like Ryan and Pence will take the wheel, and it'll just be a regular Republican administration. The more involved Trump is, I think the more potential there is for there to be actual schisms between the party and Trump, and that creates an opportunity for Democrats to possibly step into the breach. But that would be a pretty significant thing if that actually happened. Mark asked about the filibuster, and I just think that ultimately filibuster is not going to be a meaningful option. And just how do we see international climate change measures moving ahead? China seems to be investing a lot in building support for these measures. They simply supplant the U.S. leadership role in this film, or does the whole regime collapse out the U.S.? I don't think the regime is going to collapse. The Europeans increasingly are very green. And frankly, for the Chinese, it's not an abstract affair. I mean, like the pollution in Beijing is ridiculous. I mean, it's like people are dying over there because of this. And there's a rising middle class, and the middle class cares about stuff like the environment. So I think that, maybe this is Pollyanna-ish of me, but I think that environmentally things are still going to move in a generally positive direction. Obviously, not nearly as positive as they would have had Hillary been in the White House. But there's sort of a trend towards, I think, green technology, towards fuel efficiency, the increased efficiency of batteries and wind and solar, and also, by the way, the Chinese are building lots of nuclear power plants, which you have to chalk that up as a win, because it's true that it creates nuclear waste, but the more power China derives from nuclear energy, the less they derive from coal, and that's something that is really good for the, maybe not really good, but it's basically helps alleviate greenhouse gases. So while I think that Trump's victory is bad for the planet, I don't think it's necessarily going to be the end of the world, but we'll see. Could disagreements with Trump cause Republicans and Democrats to actually work together on some issues? Yeah, that's what I was talking about. I think it's possible. If Trump really charts a moderate independent path, then it's possible that Democrats and Trump supporting Republicans could be this weird coalition. That would be pretty implausible, but he's such a wild card. It's possible. Julian says thoughts on McConnell shifting support to infrastructure. Well, that's very interesting, because Trump is Mr. Infrastructure. Everybody thinks infrastructure is a good idea. This is the one area where all you liberals that hate Trump should like Trump, because it seems like improving infrastructure is something that would just have huge dividends. Republicans have been allergic to it. McConnell says he's opposed to it. If that remains, that's going to be really interesting. That's going to be the first really big split, between the parties, and we'll have to see what. I guess I should say the factions. We have to see how that works out. And then Maria says, if there is a breakdown in transatlantic relations, what are the implications for Americans living abroad? I don't think there are too many implications. This is not like a Brexit situation where you have Americans who, or we have Brits who, are working in places like Spain or Germany, and now they run the risk of being turfed out, all the rest of that. I mean, we Americans working in Europe are there as a consequence of bilateral treaties and all the rest of that. I don't know. I mean, I think that it's possible that let's see, let me read these. I said, I've also discussed changes that might occur in leadership across Europe in response to Trump. What other implications could there be? Can we expect to see more targeted terrorist attacks to force Trump's hand and manipulate him? Well, maybe. I mean, I think that I don't know. I mean, I think that how much, if Hillary Clinton was president, would we have fewer terrorist attacks? Are we going to have more with Trump? Maybe. I mean, on the one hand, Trump seems like a baitable kind of guy, somebody who you really could wreck. Or I'm sorry, but really provoke with terror attacks. On the other hand, he's consistently struck a kind of isolationist note. So I don't know. I mean, it's just something we're going to have to see. I think the big effect on Americans living abroad is that they're going to be ashamed because Americans who travel are more likely to be liberal than conservative. They're going to be kind of just ashamed to be Americans, and they're going to be putting fake Canadian patches on their backpacks again, as happened during the 2000s under George W. Bush. So let's see. Andrew said, are we likely to see any sort of entitlement reform on Social Security? No. Medicare, maybe, probably not. Eventually, Congress needs to do something to replenish the Social Security Trust Fund, but Trump also seems to think this is untouchable. Yeah, Trump is very different from Republicans in this big way. He definitely does not want it. I mean, I don't know. I should not say definitely when I'm talking about Donald Trump, but I'd be highly shocked if he tries to go after Medicare or Social Security or anything that gives support to the elderly. He knows which side his bread is buttered on. Medicaid, absolutely, yes. You're right, Andrew. This is a long-term problem. The Social Security Trust Fund does need to be replenished. I'm not sure when it's due to go bust, but I don't think it would be during a Trump presidency. So this is a can. He's totally going to kick down the road. And by the way, that's assuming he even runs for re-election. I would not be surprised if Trump, chooses not to run 4 years from now. He's going to be 74, and I'm not sure how fun he's going to find it. I mean, it's a pretty rough gig. So that's something else to think about. So it is now 12 o'clock, midnight. I think I probably have to go to sleep. But this has been really fun for me. I hope you guys appreciated it. I mean, I hope appreciate's the wrong word. I hope that you enjoyed it or took some pleasure from it. Yeah, 2030 Mia said for the Social Security Trust Fund. So that's Trump does not have to. Okay, 2035. The disability fund is interesting. We'll see how he does with that. Anyway, I'm happy to oblige. I'll do more of these. I hope to do my next one on Facebook. It's one of my friends here is like somewhat Facebook involved, so maybe John Connick is out there, so maybe you can help me solve this problem in the future. So anyway, look, all I can say, just in closing, what I'll say is, I don't know about you guys, everybody is handling this in their own different kind of a way, but I find that when you, and this is just me, but when you take an emotional problem and you deal with it rationally, as Mia just said, it makes it much more easy. It turns it's like you're going behind the screens and you're seeing the movement of the wires. And I don't know, for me, it gives me comfort to think about it that way. And as I said in my last video cast, it's just a series of discrete, policy actions, which you're going to react to one at a time. And there's no point, giving into fear or dread right now. I think that ultimately, who knows, maybe Trump will do some stuff that you like, maybe infrastructure, maybe he'll turn out to be more moderate. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. But anyway, it's been really great talking to all you guys, seeing all your comments and everything. It's really been my pleasure. And I'm at your service. If you have any questions or concerns or anything else you want to chat, just, shoot me a line. I can't promise I'll be able to respond immediately because, I'm always juggling all my responsibilities here, but it's certainly been, it's been nice for me. And there's like 30 people listening, so it's just like a whole class. Anyway, it's been great. It's been really wonderful talking to you guys. And, keep hope alive. I think we'll make it through. We made it through worse things in American history than Trump. And I think that we'll make it through this one as well. So have a great night and be positive. And, if you want me, I'm here. Take care.